The Corvash Military Academy had survived 3 empires, 2 galactic wars, and 1 particularly embarrassing incident involving a Zelthian prince and a gravity well. It would not, Commander Thelnox suspected while reading the classified file, survive Lieutenant Kira Chen. "She seems adequate," offered Subcommander Virex, peering over Thelnox's shoulder at the human service record. The Corvash's facial plates shifted in what might have been optimism or indigestion. The expressions were identical. "That's what concerns me." Thelnox tapped the datapad, highlighting a single line buried in the psychological evaluation. "Subject demonstrates unconventional problem-solving approaches that may conflict with traditional military doctrine." In Corvash military parlance, that translated to, "This one thinks sideways, and we don't know how to stop her." The Academy's central plaza stretched before them, all austere geometry and precisely calculated shadows. Cadets from 47 species moved in formation, their steps synchronized to the atomic clock in the administrative tower. The Corvash believed in order. They believed in discipline. They believed that warfare was an art form with rules, structure, and, most importantly, predictability. Humans, Thelnox was learning, believed in none of these things. "The Earth liaison sent 7 separate communiques," Thelnox continued, scrolling through the messages. Each one grew progressively more desperate. The last one was just the words, "Please reconsider," repeated 43 times. 43? Virex's plates rippled with amusement. "Oddly specific. Humans have a pathological fear of even numbers, cultural superstition. That's the Zendari. Humans fear odd? No, wait." Virex paused. "Do humans fear any numbers?" "Apparently just the ones that appear on casualty reports they've caused." A shadow fell across the datapad. Instructor Kelris, whose species had evolved from pack hunters and retained the unfortunate habit of sneaking up on colleagues. "Discussing our newest diplomatic liability?" "She hasn't arrived yet," Thelnox protested. "Technically still just a potential liability. The human transport docked 17 minutes ago." Kelris gestured toward the arrival terminal with one of her 4 arms. "I took the liberty of observing her debarkation." "And?" She smiled at the customs officer. Thelnox and Virex exchanged glances. "That's normal greeting behavior for humans, isn't it?" "She smiled," Kelris repeated, when he asked if she had anything to declare. Then she said, "Just my winning personality and a mild case of jet lag." When he didn't understand the idiom, she explained that human circadian rhythms struggle with faster-than-light travel. Then she asked if the Academy had coffee. "Coffee's a stimulant beverage," Virex offered helpfully. "We have 17 varieties in the commissary." She said, and I'm quoting, "Is any of it good or just technically drinkable?" Kelris's expression was unreadable, mostly because her species didn't have expressions. The customs officer is now questioning his entire career. Thelnox closed the datapad. The human psychological profile was 47 pages long. Most species required 2, maybe 3, if they had complex mating rituals that affected military discipline. Humanity's profile spent 12 pages just explaining the concept of gallows humor and why it made other species uncomfortable. "Where is she now?" "Orientation hall, being processed with the other new arrivals." Kelris shifted her weight. "I assigned her to your xenopsychology seminar." "You assigned the walking diplomatic incident to my theoretical combat class?" "Your theoretical combat class," Kelris corrected, "where she cannot possibly cause real damage, unless you count psychological. The orientation hall held 200 cadets, representing the galaxy's finest military prospects. They stood in perfect rows, organized by species height and gravitational preference. The Corvash believed in efficiency. Lieutenant Chen stood in the third row, between a Metherian whose body was mostly crystallized thought and a Vorlax who breathed methane and required a portable atmosphere. She was remarkably unremarkable, average height for a human, dark hair pulled into a regulation knot, uniform precisely correct. She could have been a recruitment poster for adequately competent officer. Thelnox didn't trust it. "Welcome to the Corvash Military Academy," Thelnox began, his translator rendering the formal greeting in 47 languages simultaneously. "You are here because your civilizations believe you represent the pinnacle of military potential. You are wrong. You are unformed clay. We are the sculptors. You will be broken down, rebuilt, and if you survive, graduated as officers worthy of the Galactic Fleet." Standard speech. Thelnox had delivered it 300 times. The cadets' reactions were equally standard. Nervous determination, confident swagger, or in the Metherian's case, a subtle crystalline rearrangement that indicated mild concern. Lieutenant Chen smiled. Not the polite acknowledgement smile, not the nervous cadet smile. A smile that suggested she found something privately amusing about the entire speech, the academy, possibly the concept of military hierarchy itself. Thelnox continued. "The academy operates on 3 principles: discipline, honor, and sacrifice. Everything you do here will reflect these values. Your first assignment is to study the Battle of Corvash Prime, where Grand Admiral Thexnor sacrificed his entire fleet to uphold the Treaty of—" Chen's hand rose. Slowly, properly, exactly as regulations demanded. "Yes, Lieutenant?" "Question, sir. The Battle of Corvash Prime. That's the one where Thexnor had the option to retreat and regroup, but chose a frontal assault against a fortified position because withdrawing would have technically violated the treaty's honor clause." Every Corvash in the room stiffened. Virex made a sound like grinding metal. "That is one interpretation," Thelnox said carefully, "and he lost 93% of his forces in the first wave." "Casualties are irrelevant when honor is—" "Irrelevant to whom, sir? The crews who died, or the admirals who wrote the history books?" The hall went silent. The kind of silence that precedes either enlightenment or execution. Thelnox felt his facial plates lock. "Lieutenant Chen, are you questioning the tactical decisions of the greatest military commander in Corvash history?" "No, sir." That smile again. "I'm questioning why we're supposed to study a battle as an example of excellence when the primary lesson appears to be, don't confuse pride with strategy." Somewhere behind Thelnox, Keldris muttered something in her native language that the translator refused to process. "You've been at this academy for 47 minutes, Thelnox said, very slowly. 43, sir. I spent 4 minutes getting coffee. It was, for the record, technically drinkable. And in those 43 minutes, you've decided you understand Corvash military philosophy better than scholars who have studied it for centuries." Chen's expression shifted, still pleasant, but now with a layer of genuine curiosity. "I understand that every military makes mistakes, sir. The question is whether we study them to learn or to worship them." A Vorlax cadet in the back row made a sound like escaping gas. Either shock or laughter, possibly both. Thelnox accessed his datapad, pulling up the next section of orientation. "Since you're so eager to demonstrate human tactical brilliance, Lieutenant, perhaps you'd like to volunteer for our first training exercise." "Of course, sir." "Which one?" "The Siege of Carthion simulation." Thelnox watched for a reaction. "Are you familiar with it? The unwinnable scenario? The one designed to teach cadets about honorable defeat and accepting tactical limitations?" Chen nodded. "Yes, sir. I read about it on the transport. And you're volunteering? Absolutely, sir. Virex leaned closer to Thelnox. Perhaps we should reconsider. If she fails spectacularly, it could cause interspecies tension. Earth might lodge a complaint. If she fails spectacularly, Thelnox murmured back, it will teach her some humility, which appears to be Earth's primary export shortage. He addressed the hall again. Lieutenant Chen will attempt the siege of Carthion tomorrow at 0800 hours. All cadets are invited to observe. Class dismissed. The cadets filed out in orderly rows. Chen lingered, approaching the instructor's platform with that same unsettling calm. Permission to speak freely, sir. Thelnox's plates shifted to their maximum defensive position. Granted, reluctantly. You're expecting me to fail. The scenario is mathematically impossible. Every tactical option leads to defeat. The point is learning to fail with dignity. Right. Chen nodded slowly. And if I don't fail? Then the Academy's most sophisticated simulation will have fundamentally malfunctioned, and will have larger problems than one overconfident human. That smile returned. Looking forward to it, sir. She left with a perfect salute, regulation precise, utterly correct. Virex waited until she was gone. We should contact Earth's liaison. Warn them. Of what? That their cadet volunteered for an impossible exercise? No. Virex's plates rippled with an emotion Thelnox couldn't identify. That you just gave her exactly what she wanted. Thelnox stared at the empty doorway, remembering the liaison's final message. Whatever you do, do not engage her in theoretical scenarios. Humans don't solve problems. They redefine them. We'll increase observation protocols, he said finally. Maximum surveillance. Every decision documented. You think that will help? No, Thelnox admitted. But when Earth demands an explanation for whatever she's about to do, at least we'll have detailed records of how thoroughly we failed to stop it. Outside, the Academy's twin suns set in perfect synchronization, their light casting long shadows across precisely maintained grounds. Everything in order, everything controlled. For now. The simulation chamber occupied the Academy's entire subterranean level, a cathedral of holographic projectors and quantum processors capable of rendering battles across 17 dimensions simultaneously. Cadet observers filled the amphitheater seating, their conversations creating a multilingual buzz that the translators struggled to parse. 10 credits says she requests immediate evacuation within the first hour, muttered a Vorlax cadet, his breathing apparatus hissing with each word. His companion, a Zelthian with bioluminescent skin, currently displaying skeptical, purple, rippled disagreement. Humans are stubborn. She'll last 2 hours minimum before acknowledging the mathematics. You're both wrong, interrupted a third voice, Cadet Rixonal, whose species had evolved from ambush predators and therefore excelled at reading body language. Watch her stance. She's relaxed. Humans get tense when they're worried. She's not worried. Then she's ignorant, or she knows something we don't. Below, in the staging area, Chen stood alone in the center of a chalk circle, the traditional starting position for Carthion scenarios. Holographic walls materialized around her, forming a fortress interior that had been meticulously reconstructed from historical records. The siege of Carthion wasn't fiction. It had been a real battle, a legendary last stand where Commander HFY held a strategic way station against impossible odds for 17 days before honorable surrender. 17 days. The record for the simulation was 4 hours, achieved by a tactical prodigy who'd later gone mad and joined a monastery. Thelnox's voice echoed from the observation deck. Lieutenant Chen, you command a garrison of 300 defenders holding Carthion Station against a siege force of 10,000. Your supplies allow for 14 days of rationing. Relief forces are 20 days away. Surrender protocols are available at any time. Begin. The holographic enemies appeared. Wave after wave of assault troops, siege equipment, orbital bombardment positions. The Corvash simulation didn't believe in subtlety. It believed in teaching cadets that some situations had no clever solution, only degrees of acceptable failure. Chen walked to the nearest terminal and pulled up the station schematics. Then the enemy composition analysis. Then the supply manifests. Her fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, but her expression remained maddeningly neutral. She's assessing standard defensive positions, observed Virex from the instructor's booth, watching biometric readouts. Heart rate normal, stress hormones within acceptable ranges. She's treating this like a routine briefing. Give her time, Thelnox replied. The scenario adapts. Once she commits to a strategy, it will demonstrate why that strategy fails. Carthion teaches through escalation. Chen spent 15 minutes reviewing data. Then she accessed the communications array and began recording a message. This is Lieutenant Kira Chen, acting commander of Carthion Station, broadcasting on all frequencies, including those monitored by the besieging force. I am formally requesting immediate parley with the enemy commander under the Treaty of Valtos, subsection 7, which guarantees safe conduct for diplomatic negotiations during active siege operations. In the observation deck, a Metherian cadet's crystalline structure literally froze mid-thought. She's requesting negotiation? That's the first response? The enemy doesn't negotiate in Carthion scenarios, another cadet whispered. They're programmed for total conquest. It's the entire point. The simulation's enemy commander materialized, a holographic Scarvan warlord, all chitinous armor and mandible-clicking aggression. Your surrender will be accepted, unconditionally. I'm not offering surrender. I'm offering a deal. The amphitheater erupted in confused chatter. Deals weren't part of Corvash military doctrine. You fought with honor or you didn't fight at all. Chen continued, addressing the holographic warlord with the same casual tone she'd used discussing coffee. Here's the situation from your perspective. You outnumber us 30-1. You'll win eventually. But my defensive position is excellent, my troops are well trained, and you're operating on a timeline. There's a reason you need this station captured quickly, or you wouldn't have committed such overwhelming force. Thelnox leaned forward. The simulation wasn't supposed to engage in speculation about enemy motivations. That required adaptive artificial intelligence beyond standard parameters. The warlord's image flickered. The computer processing unprecedented. Dialogue trees. Continue. I'm proposing we skip the part where thousands of your soldiers die taking this station room by room. I'll evacuate my personnel through the southern emergency hatches. You've left them unsealed, probably hoping I'll try exactly that so you can ambush us. Instead, I'll leave the station intact, fully functional, and ready for your immediate use. In exchange, you allow my people safe passage to the relief coordinates. You would abandon your post without firing a shot? I would avoid meaningless casualties on both sides while achieving my primary objective, preserving my troops' lives. The simulation hesitated. Literally. The holographic warlord froze for 3 full seconds while processors struggled with a scenario they'd never encountered. A defender treating warfare as a negotiation rather than a glorious inevitability. Kelris appeared beside Thelnox, all 4 arms crossed. She's breaking the simulation. She's following treaty law, Thelnox countered, pulling up the relevant documents. The Treaty of Valtos does technically allow for parley during siege conditions. The programmers never included it, because no Corvash commander would consider. Surrendering without a fight? I was going to say treating the enemy as a rational actor with negotiable interests. Below, the simulation made its choice. The warlord's image solidified. Proposal rejected. We take the station by force or not at all. Glory demands blood. Chen nodded, as if she'd expected this. Understood. In that case, I'm implementing Protocol 17. Silence in the observation deck. Absolute, confused silence. What's Protocol 17? Someone finally asked. Chen began entering commands rapidly. It's something humans developed during the Syndicate conflicts. When you can't win militarily and negotiation fails, you change what victory means. Holographic displays showed her accessing the station's environmental systems, the power grid, the structural supports. Not to defend, to dismantle. I'm venting all atmosphere from non-essential sections, shutting down 90% of life support, diverting all power to critical systems only. Then I'm contaminating the water recyclers with a slow-acting bacterial agent, harmless to humans, toxic to Scarvan physiology. It'll take 6 months to fully purge. The enemy forces began their assault, breaching charges, advancing troops, the full military spectacle. They captured the outer walls within an hour, exactly as projected. They found empty corridors and dying systems. Chen's garrison had retreated to a single fortified section, a space barely large enough for 300 people, but perfectly defensible with their concentrated firepower. The station around them became a hollow shell, its systems corrupted, its strategic value diminishing by the minute. "She's making the prize worthless," breathed Rixnall from the cadet section. "The station's still there, but capturing it means inheriting a logistical nightmare." The simulation adapted, throwing everything at Chen's reduced perimeter. Suicide charges, chemical weapons, siege bombardment that threatened to collapse the entire structure. Chen's garrison held. Barely. Casualty projections climbed. 30% losses, 40, 50. "She's going to lose anyway," Virex said. "Just slower and more expensively for everyone involved." But then day 14 arrived. The timeline where supplies ran out in standard scenarios. Except Chen had reduced her garrison's footprint so drastically that supply consumption had dropped proportionally. Her people were cramped, exhausted, operating on minimal rations. But they were still functional. Still fighting. Day 17. The historical commander HFY had surrendered here with honor and dignity. Chen sent another message to the enemy. "Your forces have been besieging a gradually deteriorating asset for over 2 weeks. Your casualties are mounting. Your timetable is blown. Meanwhile, my relief forces are now 3 days out, and when they arrive, you'll be trapped between my fortified position and their fresh fleet. I'm offering one final negotiation. Withdraw now, or stay and face a 2-front battle for a station that's barely worth the reactor cores it's built on." The simulation's processors worked overtime, calculating probable outcomes, weighing virtual costs against virtual benefits. The enemy forces withdrew, not surrendered, not defeated, simply left. The simulation ended with a soft chime that sounded almost confused. Chen had won. Technically, her garrison survived. The station remained in friendly hands, more or less. Relief forces arrived to find exhausted but living defenders and a facility that would require months of repair. No glorious battle, no honorable sacrifice. Just a mathematically sound solution to an impossible problem that involved making everyone equally miserable until the more rational party gave up. The amphitheater sat in stunned silence. Finally, a Corvish cadet stood. An unprecedented breach of observation protocol. That's not how warfare works." Chen, still standing in the simulation chamber, looked up at the observation windows. Her voice carried clearly through the speakers. "It's exactly how warfare works when you're trying to survive instead of trying to be remembered. The question is, which one matters more to you?" Thelnox found himself accessing historical records, cross-referencing human military conflicts. The patterns emerged like a punch to his cognitive centers. Humans didn't just fight wars. They made war itself too expensive, too complicated, too psychologically exhausting to sustain. They turned battlefields into cost-benefit analyses. "She didn't win," he said slowly. "She made winning irrelevant." Kelris's translator caught her species' equivalent of a laugh, a sound like breaking glass. Worse, she made the simulation question why it was fighting in the Abusi first place. In the staging area, Chen picked up her jacket and headed for the exit, looking no more satisfied than if she'd completed routine paperwork. Virex pulled up the after-action analysis. Numbers scrolled past. Tactical assessments, strategic evaluations, efficiency ratings. At the bottom, a single line in Corvash military script. Outcome classification, undefined. Recommend tribunal review. "We're going to have to convene the council," Thelnox said. "On what grounds?" She didn't break any rules. No. Thelnox watched Chen disappear through the exit, still wearing that slight, knowing smile. She just proved that our rules were designed for a kind of warfare that humans abandoned centuries ago. And now we have to decide if that makes them more advanced than us, or just more disturbing. The cadets began filing out, their conversations a chaotic mix of awe, horror, and furious debate. Rixenal paused at the exit, looking back at the empty simulation chamber. "Hey," he called to his companions. "Anyone else realize she never actually checked if Protocol 17 was real? She just made it up, and the simulation believed her." They stopped. Considered. "Humans," the Vorlax muttered, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly with agitation. "They don't just bend rules. They invent them mid-battle and act like they've existed all along. Think that'll work in real combat?" "Real combat has human opponents," Rixnell pointed out. "They'll know all the same tricks. Then what happens when two humans fight each other?" Nobody had an answer. The observation deck emptied, leaving only instructors and the humming processors still trying to categorize what they'd witnessed. Thelnox composed a message to the Academy Council. Emergency session required. Human cadet has completed Carthion simulation. Results require immediate philosophical and tactical review. He paused before sending, adding one final line. "Recommend we contact Earth's military liaison. We need to know if this is standard human doctrine, or if we've accepted an exceptionally dangerous anomaly." The message sent. In the distance, the Academy's bells chimed for evening formation. Precise, orderly, predictable. Thelnox suspected that predictability had approximately 12 hours left to live. The council chamber predated the Academy by 6 centuries, its walls carved from a single piece of quantum-locked stone that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Very impressive. Very expensive. Very Corvash. Chen sat in the respondent's circle, hands folded, expression suggesting she'd rather be literally anywhere else, but was too polite to mention it. The council itself represented 9 species, 3 philosophical traditions, and approximately 4,000 years of combined military service. They arranged themselves in a crescent formation specifically designed to create psychological pressure on the person being questioned. Chen looked like she was waiting for a shuttle that was running late. Grand Magistrate Kreloth, a Corvash so old his facial plates had fused into something resembling geological formations, spoke first. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd forgotten more about warfare than most species had learned. "Lieutenant Chen, you understand why you've been summoned? I successfully completed a training exercise, sir. You perverted a sacred educational tool into something unrecognizable. I adapted to the parameters provided, sir. Magistrate Venisa, whose species communicated partially through pheromones that made everyone in the room vaguely anxious, leaned forward. The siege of Carthion is meant to teach acceptance of inevitable defeat. You learned nothing. Respectfully, Magistrate, I learned that inevitable is a word people use when they've stopped thinking creatively. A junior council member, Adjunct Plex, fresh enough to still believe in productive debate, interjected. But you didn't achieve a traditional military victory. You achieved, what would you call it? A successful operational outcome with minimal casualties on all sides. You made the enemy give up out of sheer frustration. Chen's eyebrow rose fractionally. Yes, sir. That's a valid military strategy. We call it winning. Kreloth's plates ground together, producing a sound like continental drift. We call it dishonorable. Your species calls it dishonorable, Chen corrected. The 16 other intelligent species in this galaxy might have different opinions about what constitutes honor versus what constitutes stupidity masquerading as principle. The chamber erupted. Not in shouting. Korvash didn't shout. But in the deeply unsettling sound of multiple species attempting to express outrage through their translators simultaneously. Kelris, attending as primary witness, raised one of her 4 hands. If I may, the human does raise a philosophical point worth examining. You're defending this? Venisa's pheromones shifted to something that made half the room sneeze. I'm suggesting we consider whether our definitions of proper warfare have become inflexible. Thelnux stood from his position in the witness gallery. The real question is whether Lieutenant Chen's approach represents teachable doctrine or dangerous individualism. It represents, Chen said, her voice cutting through the debate with unexpected force, the reason humanity survived its own adolescence. We had a choice. Perfect the art of killing each other efficiently, or get better at making war too annoying to bother with. Silence. The kind that suggested everyone was mentally translating that sentence and hoping they'd misunderstood. Magistrate Kreloth accessed a holographic display. Your species' military history is extensively documented. We've reviewed it. The nuclear standoffs, the proxy conflicts, the biological deterrence. You didn't evolve past war. You industrialized mutual suffering until nobody wanted to participate. Correct? That's not military excellence. That's sociological terrorism. Chen stood, stepping forward to the edge of her circle. Protocol violation, but nobody stopped her. Magistrate, may I tell you about the Battle of Stalingrad? I fail to see how human historical trivia is relevant. 2 million casualties, 2 million, for one city. Both sides refused to withdraw because surrender meant dishonor, defeat meant shame, and everyone involved confused stubbornness with strategy. She paused. We studied that battle for generations, not to celebrate it, to make absolutely certain we never repeated it. Yet you claim Earth has a proud military tradition. Venisa challenged. We have a practical military tradition. There's a difference. Pride is what gets you Stalingrad. Practicality is what gets you home alive. Adjunct Plex consulted his notes. Your simulation approach, corrupting the objective, reducing its value, making victory economically unfeasible, that's standard Earth doctrine. It's one approach. We have others. Disinformation campaigns, economic warfare, turning enemy populations against their own leadership, psychological operations designed to make soldiers question why they're fighting. Chen ticked them off on her fingers. The goal isn't glorious battle, it's making the other side stop. By any means necessary? By the most efficient means available. A new voice entered the debate. Admiral Haxcore, retired, whose combat record included the Fringe Wars and 3 separate peace negotiations. He'd been silent until now, observing from the chamber's periphery. I fought humans once, he said. Every head turned. Border skirmish, early contact period. Before official relations. We expected conventional engagement, fleet positioning, tactical exchanges, honorable resolution. What happened? Plex asked. They broadcast our private communications back to our homeworld. Command frequencies, personal messages, everything. Except they edited them. Made it sound like our fleet commander was incompetent, cowardly, possibly corrupt. Within 6 hours, our own government was demanding our withdrawal to face investigation. Haxkor's expression, complex even for a Corvash, suggested grudging admiration. We never fired a shot. The battle ended before it began because they made our own people defeat us. That's... Venisa started. Brilliant, Haxkor finished. Horrifying, yes. Unethical by our standards, certainly, but brilliant. They won without casualties, without destruction, without creating the kind of martyrdom that fuels generations of revenge. Just cold, efficient, psychological dismantlement. Chen nodded. We learned that violence is easy. Victory is complicated. And peace is the hardest thing of all, which is why we've gotten very good at forcing it on people who think they want war. Kreloth's ancient eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. You're not training to be a warrior, Lieutenant. You're training to be something we don't have a word for. Try survivor, sir. I was thinking saboteur of certainty. Thelnox stepped forward, entering the debate circle, another protocol violation that would have been unthinkable yesterday. The fundamental issue is whether the Academy can accommodate human methodology without compromising its core principles. Can it? Kreloth directed the question at Chen. She considered carefully. Your core principle, as I understand it, is producing officers who uphold honor, demonstrate courage, and accept sacrifice when necessary. I don't challenge any of that. I challenge the assumption that those virtues require fighting in specific, predictable ways. You challenge our entire military philosophy. I challenge the part of your military philosophy that's become ritual instead of strategy. Kelleris made a sound that might have been approval or choking. Her species' physiology made it ambiguous. She's suggesting we've mistaken tradition for tactical doctrine. Tradition is tactical doctrine, Venisa protested. Centuries of proven methodology. Proven against enemies who fight the same way you do, Chen interrupted. What happens when you face someone like me? Someone who doesn't engage with your honor system because they're operating under entirely different assumptions about what warfare means? Admiral Haxkor's mandibles clicked, his species equivalent of a laugh. You lose. Comprehensively, while still convinced you're morally superior. The chamber settled into uncomfortable contemplation. Outside, evening formations proceeded with mechanical precision. Inside, the council grappled with a problem that couldn't be solved by correct procedure or ancient precedent. Magistrate Kreloth accessed his terminal, reviewing something. Earth's liaison officer sent 17 additional messages during your simulation, each one progressively more alarmed. The final one included casualty estimates for hypothetical scenarios, where your approach was implemented in actual combat. And projected deaths dropped by 78% across all models. Projected mission success rates increased by 43%. Projected post-conflict stability improved by 61%. He looked up. Your methodology is statistically superior to ours in almost every measurable category. Then what's the problem, Magistrate? It makes us feel disgusting. Chen smiled. Not the unsettling one, but something gentler, almost sympathetic. That's how progress usually feels at first. Like you're abandoning something sacred for something merely effective. Adjunct Plex cleared his throat. The Council must vote. Lieutenant Chen's status at this academy requires resolution. Do we expel her for philosophical incompatibility, or do we acknowledge that warfare evolves, and our teaching must evolve with it? There's a third option, Hackscore offered. We could actually learn from her, not replace our traditions, but supplement them. Prepare our officers for enemies who won't follow our rules. You're suggesting we teach psychological warfare? Venisa's pheromones suggested she'd rather teach interpretive dance to asteroids. I'm suggesting we teach reality, which apparently includes the fact that humans figured out how to win wars by making everyone involved wish they'd never started. Kreloth stood, his ancient frame creaking. Council will recess for deliberation. Lieutenant Chen, you're dismissed. Temporarily. We'll summon you when we've reached a decision. Chen saluted. Perfectly, precisely, exactly as regulations demanded, and departed. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss. The council members looked at each other, each clearly hoping someone else would volunteer to solve an unsolvable problem. Finally, Thelnox spoke. We're not really debating whether her methods work. We're debating whether we want to admit they work better than ours. That's not a small admission, Plex said. No, Hackscore agreed. It's only an admission that we've been teaching our cadets how to die beautifully instead of how to live strategically. Venisa's pheromones shifted to something approaching resignation. If we accept this human's approach, we're accepting that honor might be less important than effectiveness. We're accepting, Kreloth corrected, that honor without victory is just expensive suicide. The question is whether our pride can survive that realization. Outside the chamber, Chen waited in the corridor, reading something on her datapad. Probably tactical theory, possibly ancient Earth philosophy. Knowing humans, the two were likely indistinguishable. She glanced up as Rixnall approached, the cadet who'd observed her simulation with uncomfortable accuracy. How'd it go? He asked. They're deciding whether I'm a dangerous revolutionary or just ahead of the curriculum. Which are you? Chen considered. Both? Neither. I'm just someone who realized that the best way to win a fight is to convince everyone it's not worth fighting. Everything else is just details. Think they'll let you stay? Honestly? I think they're terrified that if they let me stay, I'll infect the entire academy with common sense. And if they make me leave, they'll have to explain to their graduates why human forces keep beating them with tactics they refused to study. Rixnall's bioluminescence flickered with amusement. Quite the diplomatic incident. The best kind. The one where everyone's wrong and nobody wants to admit it. Inside the chamber, voting commenced. The decision, whatever it was, would ripple far beyond one human cadet's academic career. It would determine whether the galaxy's premier military institution could adapt to the uncomfortable truth that warfare had already evolved past them, and the species they'd dismissed as primitive newcomers were actually several philosophical revolutions ahead. The vote concluded. Results sealed. HFY messenger dispatched. Chen waited, still reading, still calm, still wearing that expression that suggested she already knew how this would end. She probably did. Humans, Thelnox was learning, had an unfortunate habit of being right about things everyone else wished were wrong. 6 months later, the Corvash Military Academy looked exactly the same. Same quantum-locked stone, same precise formations, same twin suns setting in mathematical perfection. Everything had changed. Cadet Rixnall stood outside Lecture Hall 7, watching the incoming class filter through orientation, with expressions ranging from confidence to terror. He remembered his own arrival, the certainty that Corvash tradition represented the apex of military thought, the belief that ancient methods had survived because they were superior. He'd been an idiot. First day jitters? Asked Cadet Voshuti, a Zelthian who'd arrived in Chen's cohort and somehow survived the philosophical whiplash. Remembering my first day, wondering what these newcomers will think when they discover the curriculum isn't what they expected. You mean when they discover that advanced strategic theory now includes a unit called When Honor Becomes Liability, a Practical Assessment. Rixnall's bioluminescence flickered with dark humor. Or when they realize the Carthion simulation now has 17 different completion pathways, and only one involves traditional siege defense. 16, Vashuti corrected. They removed the one where you poison the water supply. Apparently, several species filed formal protests about chemical warfare ethics. But they kept the one where you fake a plague outbreak and quarantine the entire station. That's psychological operations, not chemical warfare. Completely different ethical category. Vashti's sarcasm transcended species barriers. They entered the lecture hall, capacity 400, currently holding twice that as cadets squeezed into every available space. The course had become mandatory, also controversial, also the most requested class transfer in Academy history. Instructor Thelnox stood at the podium, his facial plates arranged in what might have been resignation or enlightenment. Possibly both. Behind him, a guest lecturer reviewed notes with the casual focus of someone about to destabilize several thousand years of military orthodoxy. Lieutenant Chen, now wearing the insignia of a junior instructor, looked exactly as she had 6 months ago. Unremarkable. Average. Dangerously competent in ways that didn't announce themselves until too late. Thelnox called the hall to order. Welcome to Advanced Strategic Theory. Before we begin, I'll address the question you're all thinking. Yes, this is the class. Yes, the rumors are partially accurate. No, we're not teaching you to abandon honor. We're teaching you to recognize when honor serves strategy and when it serves ego. A Corvash cadet in the front row. Traditional mindset, judging by the ceremonial rank. Pins. Raised his hand. Sir, is it true that Lieutenant Chen is now developing curriculum? Lieutenant Chen is a guest lecturer, providing alternative perspectives on conflict resolution. Alternative to what, sir? To winning? Chen stepped forward, her smile suggesting she'd heard this exact challenge approximately 600 times. Alternative to assuming there's only one definition of winning. Tell me, Cadet, what's your name? Vecnor, ma'am. Cadet Vecnor, if you were defending a position against superior forces, what would you do? Establish defensive perimeter, maximize firepower concentration, prepare for honorable last stand? And when would you surrender? Vecnor's plates stiffened. When continuing the fight would violate treaty protocols or result in unnecessary civilian casualties. Acceptable answer. Now tell me, what if you could end the battle without surrender, without last stands, without any of that dramatic nonsense? What if you could just make the enemy decide attacking you wasn't worth the effort? That's cowardice. That's asymmetric warfare, and it's kept my species alive through conflicts that should have exterminated us. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's historical timeline. We've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. The only reason we survived long enough to reach space is because we got very, very good at making war unpalatable. Another cadet, this one a Metherian whose crystalline structure pulsed with curiosity, spoke up. The Council's decision was never made public. Are you permitted to be here, or is this some kind of probationary status? Thelnox and Chen exchanged glances. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe mutual respect, possibly shared exhaustion with the question. The Council voted, Thelnox said carefully, to create a new department. Isometric Strategic Studies. Lieutenant Chen was appointed founding director. The hall erupted in confused chatter. Founding director meant permanent faculty, meant institutional legitimization, meant the Academy had officially endorsed everything Chen represented. They created an entire department just to contain her ideas, Voshati whispered to Rixnall. or to prevent other militaries from getting them first, Rixnall countered. If humans are teaching this at the galaxy's premier academy, everyone has to learn it or risk being left behind. Chen waited for silence, then continued. Here's what you need to understand. Conventional warfare assumes both sides want the same thing: territory, resources, political dominance. But what if one side wants something different? What if one side just wants you to go away and leave them alone? Then they should surrender, Vecnor insisted. Why? Surrender means accepting your terms. I'm talking about making you accept that enforcing your terms costs more than they're worth. She manipulated the display, showing economic models, casualty, projections, political stability analyses. Every battle has a price. My job is teaching you to inflate that price until your enemy does the math and leaves voluntarily. A Vorlax cadet, breathing apparatus wheezing with agitation, raised a mechanical appendage. This sounds like you're teaching us to avoid actual combat. I'm teaching you to win before combat becomes necessary. There's a difference. But what about martial honor? Combat prowess? The warrior's code? Chen's expression shifted. Something harder beneath the pleasant exterior. Tell me about the warrior's code when you're explaining to families why their loved ones died defending a strategic position that didn't need defending. Tell me about combat prowess when you're reporting casualties that accomplished nothing except proving you knew how to fight. Tell me about martial honor when you're standing in a graveyard full of people who chose pride over survival. The hall went silent. Uncomfortable, squirming silence. Thelnox stepped in, his voice softer than usual. Lieutenant Chen lost family in Earth's last major conflict, the Syndicate Rebellion. Her perspective comes from experience, not theory. Chen's jaw tightened fractionally, the only indication that Thelnox had touched something personal. My grandfather commanded a defensive garrison. Textbook operation. Perfect execution. He held his position for 3 weeks against impossible odds, bought crucial time for civilian evacuations, and died with 97% of his forces because retreat would have been dishonorable. She paused, letting that sink in. Afterward, strategic analysis concluded the position could have been abandoned with 0 casualties and identical tactical outcomes, but abandoning it would have looked like cowardice. So 97 people died to preserve the appearance of courage. Her smile returned, but colder. I'm teaching you to not be my grandfather. You're welcome. Vecnor shifted uncomfortably. But surely some positions must be defended regardless of cost. Name one. Sacred sites, cultural heritage, symbolic locations that represent... Things, Chen interrupted. You're listing things. Objects, symbols. Now tell me if those things are worth more than the people who die defending them. Some principles transcend individual survival. And some principles are just expensive ways to avoid admitting you made a tactical mistake. Chen turned to address the entire hall. Look, I'm not saying honor doesn't matter. I'm saying honor should enhance strategy, not replace it. The bravest thing you can do is choose the smart option when everyone's expecting the heroic one. Thelnox pulled up the day's primary case study. We'll be examining the Talos incident, a recent border dispute resolved through what Lieutenant Chen would call aggressive de-escalation. Admiral Hackscore himself has provided classified documentation. The next 2 hours dissolved into vigorous debate. Chen presented scenarios where traditional military responses would have escalated conflicts, then demonstrated alternatives: economic pressure, information warfare, strategic embarrassment campaigns designed to make enemies back down without explicit defeat. Some cadets embraced it. Others looked physically ill. Rixnall found himself in the embrace camp. The logic was undeniable once you stopped treating warfare as performance art and started treating it as problem-solving. As the lecture concluded, Vecnor approached Chen's podium. His ceremonial pins seemed dimmer somehow, less certain. "Ma'am, permission to ask a personal question?" "Granted." "Do you enjoy this? Teaching us to fight without fighting? Doesn't it feel like cheating?" Chen considered him thoughtfully. "Cadet, warfare isn't a game with rules. It's organized violence in pursuit of political objectives. The question isn't whether my methods feel fair. The question is whether they achieve the objective with minimum suffering. Everything else is just aesthetic preference. But doesn't part of you want the glory? The recognition that comes with traditional victory? I want to go home knowing I didn't waste lives proving I could follow doctrine." She began gathering her materials. "Glory is what people invent to make survivors feel better about the dead. I'd rather have fewer dead and less glory." Vecnor nodded slowly, processing. "Thank you, ma'am, I think." After the cadets filed out, Thel Nox approached Chen's station. "That was gentler than usual. You're getting soft." "I'm getting diplomatic. There's a difference. The council is still divided, you know. Half think you're the Academy's future. The other half think you're an infection that'll destroy everything we've built. And you?" Thel Nox's plates shifted. Complex emotions for a species that prided itself on stoic control. "I think you're terrifying. I also think you're right, mostly. The universe doesn't care about our traditions, and enemies won't accommodate our preferences for how battles should be fought. So you're in the necessary evil camp. I'm in the reality doesn't negotiate camp." He paused. "For what it's worth, Admiral Haxcore recommended you for permanent faculty specifically, because you make us uncomfortable. He said comfort is how military doctrine becomes obsolete." Chen smiled. Genuine this time, not the calculated version. "The Admiral's smarter than he looks. He's a decorated war hero who restructured galactic naval doctrine. How does he look? Like someone who learned from his mistakes instead of just collecting medals for them." They walked toward the exit together. Instructor and guest lecturer, representing philosophies that should have been incompatible, but somehow coexisted. Outside, the Academy's grounds stretched beneath dual sunsets. New cadets practiced formations with mechanical precision, traditional excellence, maintained through centuries of refinement. In a nearby building, Chen's department was already establishing itself. Asymmetric strategic studies. 3 permanent faculty positions approved. Curriculum under development. Controversy guaranteed. Thel Nox paused at the branching path. "You know what the real problem is? That I'm right? That you're contagious? 6 months ago, this academy taught one way to fight. Now we're teaching dozens. In 5 years, we'll be teaching hundreds. Because once you convince people that effectiveness matters more than aesthetics, there's no going back." Sounds like progress to me. Sounds like the end of everything that made this place special. Chen looked at him seriously. "Or the beginning of everything that makes it relevant. Your choice which narrative you prefer." She headed toward her department building, leaving Thel Nox alone with his thoughts and the settling dusk. A young instructor, newly assigned, fresh from combat rotation, approached. "Sir, is it true what they're saying? That we're training cadets to avoid fighting?" Thel Nox watched Chen disappear into her building, probably to develop another lecture that would horrify traditionalists and save countless lives. "No, Instructor. We're training them to win. We're just finally admitting that winning doesn't require dying dramatically to prove a point." "But that's not the Corvash way." "It wasn't," Thel Nox agreed. "Now we'll see if the Corvash way can evolve, or if we become a historical footnote about species too proud to adapt." The new instructor looked confused, troubled, uncertain. Perfect, Thelnox thought. Confusion meant thinking. Thinking meant questioning. Questioning meant the possibility of something better than blind adherence to glorious tradition. He'd spent his entire career teaching certainty. Turned out uncertainty was the more valuable lesson. The Academy's evening bells chimed. Precise, orderly, predictable. Tomorrow they'd chime again, calling cadets to classes where they'd learn that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose survival over symbolism. Some would resist, some would embrace it. All would graduate better prepared for a galaxy that didn't care about anyone's preferred method of warfare. In her office, Chen reviewed lesson plans, made annotations, prepared for next week's session on diplomatic hostage situations when negotiation is just warfare by other means. Her datapad chimed, message from Earth's military liaison, finally checking in after 6 months of radio silence. Status update? She typed back. Teaching the galaxy's finest that their finest might not be good enough. Going well. Haven't caused any interstellar incidents yet. Yet? Week's not over. She smiled. That same smile that had terrified instructors and completed impossible simulations and turned military doctrine inside out. The smile of someone who'd been warned against engagement and stepped forward anyway. Not because she wanted conflict, but because sometimes the only way to prevent disaster was to walk directly toward it and redefine what disaster meant. Outside, cadets marched in formation. Inside, revolution disguised itself as curriculum development. The Corvash Military Academy would survive. It always did. But it would never again confuse tradition with truth, or mistake ritual for strategy, or assume that the way things had always been done was the way things should continue. One human cadet had seen to that. By doing nothing more threatening than asking uncomfortable questions, providing honest answers, and smiling when everyone expected her to be intimidated. Turned out that was all it took to change the galaxy. That, and the willingness to be proven right while everyone desperately wished you were wrong. Chen closed her datapad and headed home. Another day of institutional reformation complete. Tomorrow she'd do it again, and the day after. Until either the galaxy learned to fight smarter, or she ran out of uncomfortable truths to teach. Given humanity's history, she had plenty in reserve. The suns set, the academy settled. The revolution continued, quiet and inevitable as gravity. Exactly as planned.